What's up, guys? My name is Jake, and welcome to Abandoned, episode 33. This is the show where we talk about some of the most interesting abandoned places in the world. In the heart of Pontiac, Michigan, sits one of the most famous abandoned structures in North America. At one time, the largest NFL stadium in the United States, and host to incredible events like Super Bowl 16. This is the Pontiac Silverdome. As early as the late 1950s, the Silverdome had been brought up on several occasions to incorporate it in city and statewide community projects. By 1966, the stadium was finally realistically considered to continue the redevelopment projects for the city of Pontiac. Proposed to be constructed on a 128-acre plot of land at the corner of two major highways, the Pontiac Metropolitan Stadium was extremely well received by the city. Urban planner Don Davidson had dreamed up the design and was architecturally drawn by Bruno Leon. With approval, in 1973, the Pontiac Metropolitan Stadium had broke ground. After 23 months of construction, on August 23, 1975, the stadium had opened to the public. It had instantly become the largest NFL stadium with 102 luxury suites, 7,384 club seats, and 72,825 regular seats. Its very unique roof, made of Teflon-coated fiberglass panels, were held in place by interior air pressure. This allowed the stadium to operate year-round. It soon became the permanent home of the Detroit Lions, and their first game took place on opening day against the Kansas City Chiefs. The stadium hosted many incredible venues into its first year, with most notably The Who and Elvis Presley, both in December of 1975. Since the Pontiac Stadium had the capacity of 4 times the size of Madison Square Garden, it hosted massive concerts from Madonna, Aerosmith, the Rolling Stones, Genesis, David Bowie, Bob Seger, Elton John, Led Zeppelin, Michael Jackson, and tons more. It also acted as the setting for many events like Monster Jam, Supercross, WrestleMania 3, Pope John Paul II's mass celebration, NBA games, the 1994 World Cup, and Super Bowl 16. In 1976, the stadium's metropolitan aspect of its name had been dropped. However, by the following year, the name had been changed altogether to the Pontiac Silverdome, a name chosen based off its silver roof. As a few years passed, the Silverdome continued in its growing popularity, becoming famous for its size and amazing events. In March of 1985, sections of the original roof had begun collapsing into the stadium due to high amounts of heavy snow. It wasn't until the summer when the entire roof had been completely replaced by canvas panels and steel girders at the cost of $8 million. The popularity of the Silverdome reached its peak in September of 1987, when Pope John Paul II gathered close to 95,000 people for a mass. Another huge event came for the Silverdome when the 1994 World Cup was held in the stadium, the first indoor match in the series' history. However, following the event, things started to move downhill for the stadium. As both Pontiac's and Detroit's local economies were struggling with massive layoffs, attendance was becoming an issue. Its massive size was becoming a little too large, and regular football games had plenty of unfilled seats. In 1997, an episode of ABC's Home Improvement was based around the family going there on Thanksgiving, where Tim Allen pretty much causes a riot.
Hey, it's the Tool Man. Oh!
After the Detroit Tigers announced they would be building a new field in downtown Detroit, the Lions made the decision to do the same. A brand new 60,000-seat stadium would be built as the new home for the Detroit Lions, which meant they would be abandoning the Silverdome. Following a lawsuit with the city of Pontiac, the Lions settled to end their contract 4 years early. As Ford Field was completed in 2002, the final game for the Detroit Lions at the Pontiac Silverdome took place on January 6, 2002. Now, this left the Silverdome without a home team, and the future was honestly not looking good for the aging stadium. Every once in a while, the Silverdome would host some events, however nowhere near the amount it used to. The dome was still maintained in between each venue the space would host. Clearly though, the city knew the future of the Silverdome would not be anywhere near its past, and between 2002 and 2009, the city began accepting potential bids to sell the property. The city was left with a massive empty stadium that was charging them around $1.5 million yearly just on upkeep. With all of the proposals falling through though, the city opted to hold a public absolute auction where the highest bidder would take the property off the hands of Pontiac. So in 2009, the city officially placed the 128-acre property up for auction. Despite the history and the size of the structure, bids were nowhere near the real value of the Silverdome. Since it was an absolute auction, there was no reserve price, which meant the property would go to the highest bidder. So on November 18, 2009, the Pontiac Silverdome was sold for the unbelievable price of only $583,000. With inflation, the price to build a Silverdome was at around $219 million. The stadium was sold for 0.2% of what it cost to build. While this was a steal for the property, it was also a direct result of the recession and how bad the local economy was becoming. A Canadian real estate company had purchased the dome, vowed to put the massive venue space back into use, and invested $6 million into the property. And in March of 2010, the Silverdome finally reopened to host a monster truck event. In 2011, the owners applied to massively redevelop the Silverdome. The plans were to divide the open section of the stadium into 2 levels. The upper level would have a 30,000-seat soccer field, as the lower level would have smaller event spaces. This plan would have eliminated the roof and the expensive air fans. Ironically though, by winter of 2012, the roof had been damaged by built-up snow and ice, which began tearing through the canvas. By January of 2013, the roof was deflated to prevent further damage to the canvas. However, by the end of the month, the roof had been completely torn apart, allowing the harsh weather to damage the interior of the Silverdome. The owners filed a lawsuit against their insurance company over claims that they were wrongfully denied for the repairs. While this court case was occurring, the Silverdome was left abandoned with its roof unrepaired. With the Silverdome sitting vacant, in 2014 the owners had decided to strip the stadium's assets and liquidated them in what seemed to be a quick cash grab. Following the auctions, the company allegedly raised around $500,000, nearly what they initially paid for the Silverdome. While the megastructure sat vacant and rapidly deteriorating, the property was evaluated to be worth around $2.1 million, which they could have sold it for. Yes, they put a substantial chunk of money back into the dome, but leaving the structure as it was reduced the value immensely. $2.1 million would have been the most realistic price they would have gotten, but that just wasn't enough for the Silverdome's owners. No. They instead listed the property for sale at, get this, $30 million. 25 acres of land had already been leased to other companies, and of course the property was never sold. Instead, as time passed, the Silverdome sat completely abandoned. By 2016, many people were finding their way in and furthering the destruction of the Silverdome, including a fire in the press box as a direct result of arson. Despite the continued promise of redevelopment by the property's owners, the Pontiac Silverdome was continued to be left abandoned and in ruin, though its massive property size has been put to some sort of use. Remember back in 2015 when Volkswagen cheated their emissions test and was forced to recall nearly 500,000 vehicles? Well, I've always wondered where those cars went, and as it turns out, thanks to the massive size of the Silverdome's parking lot, Volkswagen has now stored hundreds of affected cars there until further notice. The Silverdome also appeared in, the 94th Transformers film? All I know is that it got great reviews. Anyways, finally in March of 2017, a preliminary deal was made between the property's owners and the city to finally demolish the complex. Though progress has been slow, in July an official agreement was reached to fully demolish the structure. I actually visited the site in early July of 2017, and you really can't appreciate the scale of the dome without seeing it in person. Construction crews were on site doing as what we were told, waiting for the proper permits. It does seem likely though that the land will be completely cleared by 2019, ending a long and painful run for the once incredible stadium. At the end of the day, I do believe that the owners, Triple Investment Group, had truly killed the Silverdome. While I don't think the stadium would have ever returned back to its former glory, as it was just too big for the area it was in, the owners had stopped caring about the property and left it until the city needed to step in. The Pontiac Silverdome really was an iconic stadium, not just for the NFL but for so many historic events it held. The millions of people who got to see it in its heyday, I'm sure would all agree that it was truly an incredible piece of engineering. It truly was an iconic piece of American sports, events, and architectural history, only to be left abandoned.